Good morning. Hello. I'm here today to talk to you about the Creative Moat. So it's a little intimidating to stand up here and talk about creativity in front of a room full of people who work in podcasting for a living. So I'll start with a confession. Some of the most intense creative debates I've ever had in this industry were not about story. They were about breathing. When we were producing our sci-fi series, Hollow, we had a scene set on a planet with a thinner atmosphere than Earth. And the question we ended up arguing about in the production meeting wasn't the dialogue. It was, what does breathing sound like on that planet? Would voices travel farther? Would footsteps echo differently? Would the air feel thinner? Our sound designer spent days building that environment. Now, to be clear, we could have solved that problem in like 5 minutes. There are entire libraries of stock audio with names like Sci-Fi Planet Atmosphere 3. Very efficient. But the difference between that 5-minute solution and the 3-day solution is the difference between something that sounds like content and something that feels real. And that difference is what I want to talk about today. So I came to podcasting from a slightly unusual direction. Before starting my studio, I was working in corporate strategy and business development at Warner Brothers, where part of my job was evaluating whether podcasting might become another arm of the studio. So we were asking questions like, should Batman have a podcast universe? Should Looney Tunes have podcasts for kids? And should film launches have narrative podcasts that expand the world of the movie? Which is a very surreal set of strategy meetings, by the way. And at one point, somebody asked, completely seriously, whether Bugs Bunny would perform well in the true crime category, which honestly feels like a missed opportunity. But that work gave me a front row seat to how large media companies think about emerging formats. And what became clear pretty quickly is that the economics of podcasting only make sense if audiences actually care about the creative work, which sounds obvious, right? But the industry doesn't always behave that way. In 2020, I started Violet Hour Media, and over the last few years, we produced 8 shows across fiction and nonfiction. One thing that surprised me immediately when I started the studio was how expensive great audio storytelling actually is. Podcasting has this reputation for being cheap, and technically it can be. But if you're building immersive narrative work, it's not cheap at all. For our show Hollow, we had roughly 30 actors across the series, along with writers, a composer, a director, a producer, an editor, and a sound designer. And that's before you even get to the months of writing and development that happen before a single microphone even turns on. Our job was to make actors recording in different homes and different time zones sound like they were standing together on another planet. In another show, we needed a seance set around 1900. So we had to recreate what it might actually sound like if several people were sitting around a candlelit table in a quiet Victorian room, whispering to ghosts. And in our series, Long Night in Egypt, modern-day teenagers on spring break wander into the pyramids and accidentally unleash ancient Egyptian gods, which is really the nightmare scenario for most parents planning spring break. The audience never thinks about any of this production complexity. They just press play. And that's exactly how it's supposed to work. Great creative work disappears behind the experience. But something interesting has happened in podcasting over the last few years. When I started producing shows in 2020, the hardest part of podcasting was the technology. Remote recording was messy, audio quality was inconsistent. Everyone was trying to figure out how to get studio level sound out of someone's living room. Today, many of those tools have improved dramatically. Remote recording is easier. Editing workflows are faster. AI can assist with transcription, research, rough edits, and certain elements of production. But as the mechanics of podcasting get easier, this scarce resource shifts. It shifts from production capability to creative judgment. Not can we make this show, but should we make this show? Is it interesting? Does it have a point of view? Does it sound like something people will actually return to? AI can accelerate production, but it can't create taste. It can't decide what makes a story compelling. And it definitely can't answer questions like, what does breathing sound like in an atmosphere that has less oxygen than Earth? More recently, I've been working in nonfiction as well, including our new show, The Fear Archive, which looks at a very different format from a sci-fi narrative. It's built around hosts, conversation, and audience engagement. There's a visual layer. The pacing is different. The creative focus shifts from world building to host chemistry and narrative framing. But what's interesting is that the underlying lesson is exactly the same. In fiction, the creative work might be sound design or scoring or performances. In nonfiction, it might be voice or personality or narrative framing. But what audiences are responding to is still creative identity. They're responding to a show that feels intentional, a show that knows what it is. And in practice, that usually comes from a team making hundreds of small creative decisions that most listeners will never notice individually. But they feel the result. And that matters for the people in this room. Because if you're a brand, a buyer, or a platform evaluating podcasting, the real question isn't how many shows can we produce? The real question is what actually creates durable value in audio? Is it scale? Is it efficiency? Or is it the ability to build something distinctive enough that people return to it week after week? Every other entertainment industry has eventually confronted this same reality. Film, television, games. Creative differentiation drives long-term value. Not every ambitious project works. I mean, Quibi existed. But the absence of creative investment reliably produces mediocrity. Podcasting grew incredibly quickly. And as the industry scaled, we naturally started focusing on the things that are easiest to measure. Downloads, ad impressions, completion rates, all useful metrics. But none of these metrics explain why one show becomes part of someone's weekly routine while another disappears after 2 episodes. That difference almost always comes down to creative decisions. The tone, the pacing, the voice, the world you're building. And ironically, those are often the exact areas that get squeezed when budgets tighten. There's a concept in business strategy called a moat. And a moat is a thing that protects a company from competition. For example, Apple's ecosystem, the way hardware, software, and services all work together, makes it very hard for competitors to pull users away once they're inside that system. That kind of structural advantage is what a moat looks like in business. In podcasting, distribution is no longer the moat. Anyone can publish. Production tools aren't the moat. Those are becoming cheaper and faster every year. The moat is creative judgment. The ability to make decisions about story, voice, tone, and identity that creates something audiences genuinely care about. That kind of judgment takes time to build. It requires trust between creative teams. It requires taste. But once it exists, it compounds. Audiences return, they recommend it, they build habits around it. And that's the value brands and platforms are actually buying when they invest in audio. When we built that atmosphere for that planet in Hollow, the audience never knew how many creative decisions went into those sounds. They didn't know how many versions of alien atmosphere and oxygen we tested, which, by the way, is a sentence I never expected to say in my career. But they could feel the difference. Creative work is often invisible, but it's the reason people stay. So as podcasting continues to grow and as technology makes production faster and easier, the companies that win won't just be the ones producing the most content. They'll be the ones protecting creative judgment. Because in a world where everything else gets automated, creativity is the moat. Thank you.